మళ్ళీ ఫస్ట్ నుంచి
జస్ట్ వన్ స్లైడ్
అదే మీరు మొదటి చెప్పిన వాడు వినలేదు, మీరే చెప్తున్నారు. ఇప్పుడు వాడికి అక్కడ అడిగాను ఎలా ఉందని, నా మాటలు మాకు వినపట్లేదు.
సో ఫస్ట్ నుంచి చెప్పనా అవలే ఎన్ని మాట్లాడిన తర్వాత అమ్మా ఇక్కడ కూర్చోండి అమ్మా. సో బ్యాక్ వెళ్ళట్లేదు. సో ద ఫస్ట్ నుంచి ఇది అవ్వట్లేదా కుమార్? ఫస్ట్ నుంచి రావట్లేదా? వినబడుతుంది, అడగండి. Good morning students, we are going to discuss the important topic, the nightmare of the obstetrician, the ectopic pregnancy. So all of you know what is ectopic pregnancy. Normally the pregnancy gets implanted into the blastomere gets implanted into the blastocyst, into the endometrial cavity. But in ectopic pregnancy it gets implanted into the site anywhere rather than the endometrial cavity. So nowadays globally there has been marked increase in the incidence of ectopic pregnancy over the last 2 decades. And what are the causes for that? There is an increased prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases, and there is an increased popularity of use of artificial reproductive techniques. So also there is a widespread use of diagnostic tests like transvaginal ultrasound and serum beta HCG, which has resulted into the diagnosis of very early ectopic pregnancy, which would otherwise have undergone resorption and gone unnoticed in the past. So today what are our learning objectives? Our learning objectives are to enumerate the risk factors, pathophysiology and sites of occurrence of ectopic pregnancy. The second learning objective is to describe the clinical features of ruptured ectopic pregnancy and explain the management of ruptured and unruptured ectopic pregnancy. So how do we define ectopic pregnancy? Ectopic pregnancy has been defined as the fertilized ovum is implanted and it develops outside the normal endometrial cavity. This is the normal implantation, and when it is implanted any other sites outside this, and the most important is the ectopic pregnancy. So what are the sites of implantation? The implantation sites, it can be extrauterine or intrauterine. So the commonest one is extrauterine tubal. It is around 95 to 98%. The implantation site is the fallopian tube, and in that it is most importantly it is ampulla, then comes the isthmus, then infundibulum and interstitium. Then some pregnancies get implanted into the ovaries, some become primary abdominal or secondary abdominal. What is that? We'll see later on. And the intrauterine are either cervical pregnancy or cornual pregnancy. Cornual pregnancy means where the implantation is at the rudimentary horn of the uterus. So these are the various sites where it gets implanted. This is a cervical pregnancy. Then it is an interstitial pregnancy. This is the intramyometrial part of the fallopian tube where there is a pregnancy. Then it is comes the isthmus portion, the ampullary, then infundibular, ovarian, abdominal pregnancy. This is the graphical representation. So what is the incidence of ectopic pregnancy? Its exact incidence of ectopic pregnancy is not been known. It is rising, that is for sure. But some studies have shown that it is around 0.25 to 2%. It is the incidence of ectopic pregnancy. And the ectopic pregnancy, why it is important? Because previously it is to be the most important cause for maternal mortality and morbidity. But now it has, because of the widespread use of the routine antenatal scans in first trimester and the early diagnosis, this maternal mortality and morbidity has been reduced. So the important one to know is that is a recurrence. If the first time the ectopic pregnancy happens, there is a chances of recurrence is around 12%. And if it is the second time, it is around 28 to 30%. So now we'll see the most important ectopic pregnancy is the tubal pregnancy. So what are the etiology of tubal pregnancy? So etiology is multifactorial. What happens? Any factor that causes the delayed transport and entrapment of the fertilized ovum through the fallopian tube favors the implantation of the in the tube or can give rise to tubal pregnancy. So any factor which affects the motility of the fertilized ovum from the tube into the fallopian into the endometrial cavity will cause tubal pregnancy. So what are the risk factors for this? So there are high risk, the most important high risk factors, then moderate risk and the low risk factors. So what are the high risk factors? The most important is in the high risk factors are there is a history of pelvic inflammatory diseases. So why there is an increase? This is the most important cause for tubal ectopics. So why there is increase in the cases of ectopic pregnancy in case we had a history of pelvic inflammatory disease? And here it is the most important is the infection by chlamydia, and which causes the endosalpingitis. And because of this endosalpingitis, this is a subclinical infection of chlamydia, which is more likely lead to the tubal damage. So endosalpingitis leading to agglutination of the tubal mucosal folds, and there is a formation of the blind pockets where this fertilized ovum gets trapped in. And also there is a decreased ciliation and impaired tubal peristalsis, which will lead to formation of ectopic pregnancies. The second cause is endometrial pelvic tuberculosis. In India, notes as a tuberculosis is of the incidence is very high. So pelvic tuberculosis is also one of the cause for the endosalpingitis and in relation to ectopic pregnancy. Then there are other factors like any surgeries on the tube. Either it can be corrective surgeries for artificial reproductive techniques or a resulting of tubal ligation. So history of tubal ligation, ARTs, tuboplasties, any tuboplasties, tubal recanalization, any surgeries. So these are the most important factors nowadays which are increased incidence of cases of ectopic pregnancies. So contraceptive failure, when we put intrauterine contraceptive devices, it protects only the intrauterine pregnancy, but it doesn't have any effect on the extrauterine. So, and usually the progesterone, when it is inserted, there is a chance if the pregnancy occurs when there is a IUCD inside, we have to see very carefully look for the ectopic pregnancy. The previous ectopic pregnancy, when there is a history of previous ectopic pregnancy once, the chances are almost 12%, as I already mentioned you. If it is a 2 ectopics, then it is around 28%. So history of infertility, history of use of ovulation induction drugs, ART use. Then again, most important is post-abortal and puerperal sepsis. Here also, because of the post-abortal or puerperal sepsis, there can be chances of peritubal adhesions. Then there is a kinking and narrowing of the tubes. Then endometriosis, same, either it is endo or extra factors which will lead to formation of adhesions. Then other factors like congenital factors, when there is a problem in the development of the tubes. So tubal tortuosity, accessory ostia, diverticulum, partial stenosis. The most important previously, nowadays we are not seeing this, but DEX or diethyl exposure, vestibular exposure in utero will lead to tubal malformations. So these are the, and when we see for the ectopic pregnancy, usually the 5% of the ectopic pregnancy are due to the any surgeries over the tubes in cases of artificial reproductive techniques. So cigarette smoking at this usually it impairs motility. That's what they have been seen. So it's also one of the risk factor for yes. So what happens when there is a pregnancy in the tube? So there are changes in the tube. There are changes in the uterus also. So what happened into the tubes? So when the implantation is usually occurs in between the mucosal folds, and as the pregnancy go on increasing, there is increasing, it becomes thinned out. There is a decidual changes which are very minimal. The pseudocapsule is formed, and the tube on implantation side it becomes distended, thinned out, and at on one point of time it gets ruptured. So there can be chances of hemoperitoneum. The trophoblastic do not grow as that of a normal pregnancy because the tubal mucosa inside the lumen is very small, so it cannot give the place for the growing ovum into the tube. So ultimately it gets ruptured. So there are other changes in the, so simultaneously when there are changes happening into the tubes, there are changes happening into the uterus also. So but they are not up to the mark of intrauterine pregnancy, because the beta hcg levels are not up to the light of, it is not a good pregnancy. So beta hcg levels, progesterone levels are not up to that mark. So deciduea develops all the characteristic of intrauterine pregnancy, but the most important thing is there are no evidence of chorionic villi. So this is will be evident when we have a query whether it is a abortion or ectopic pregnancy. Sometimes there will be dilemma in the diagnosis, and sometimes when we do curettage and send the products for histopathological examination, if you don't find, it usually happens when there is a missed abortion. So when there is a no evidence of chorionic villi in the curettage materials in the deciduea, we have to definitely see for the ectopic sites. So there is one more thing is the Aristella phenomenon. So the Aristella phenomenon is a histological pattern of endometrium where there is a hyperplasia of the glandular cells. The changes happens. There is a hyperchromatic nuclei, there is a vacuolation, cytoplasmic vacuolation, there is a loss of cell polarity. But this Aristella reaction is not specific to ectopic pregnancy. Sometimes it can happen into the intrauterine pregnancy, though this is not very much diagnostic of ectopic pregnancy. So the most reliable finding is absence of chorionic villi in the endometrial curettage. So with the Aristella reaction and absence of chorionic villi, it is highly suggestive of ectopic pregnancy. So the residua may be usually sometimes when there is a, this residua is not forming properly, so there can be shed intermittently because the hormone supports are not proper. So there is some spotting that can happen. And so decidua may sometimes is passed as a flat reddish or brown piece, and which the patient will usually come with you. So there is a passage of mass, white mass, and it is the decidual cast. So what are the future of this ectopic pregnancy? So what is the clinical course of this tubal pregnancy? What happens with this pregnancy? So either it can be tubal mode. So the repeated small hemorrhages occur in the choriocapsular space, separating the villi from its attachment. There is a villi will be separated from its attachment, and there can be formation of a small tubal mole which will get completely aborted. Usually this expels through the abdominal ostia, but this happens very rarely. So either it can be tubal abortions, and usually this happens in the ampulla and infundibulum when the pregnancy lodged in the ampullary end or in the infundibular. Sometimes if it is a very early ectopic we have diagnosed, there can be chances of resorption naturally of this ectopis and this gone unnoticed. Then there is a, when there is a tubal abortion, then it can happen, there can be tubal rupture. If it intraperitoneal rupture or extraperitoneal rupture. If it is anti-mesenteric border, it will become intraperitoneal rupture. If it is a mesenteric border, it will have a extraperitoneal ruptures also. So there is a usually this tubal rupture happens at when the pregnancy is at the ischemic region and interstitial region. In the ischemic region, usually this is around 6 to 8 weeks. The pregnancy doesn't go beyond the 6 to 8 weeks of amenorrhea. But in interstitial, there can be chances that the pregnancy can grow at around 12 to 16 weeks, and usually the present patient will come to in the catastrophe, in the casualty, with the second trimester sudden collapse. So this is the extraperitoneal rupture through the floor of the tube. And sometimes what happens, this slowly, when there is a not tubal rupture, the small, then it gets invaded and the pregnancy gets and get lodged into the any other organ in the abdomen, and which leads to secondary abdominal pregnancy. But this happens very rarely. So usually what will happen to this secondary abdominal pregnancy? The death of the blastocyst happens. There can be, if it doesn't get proper blood supply, so the blastocyst gets died, there can be complete resorption. But sometimes there can be massive intraperitoneal hemorrhage, there can be infection, fetal death, but very, very rarely this pregnancy can continue and the patient can come to the labor room with the full-term pregnancy, where we can see that for the fetal, we can feel the fetal parts very easily, and the uterus is on one side and the fetus is on one side. If it ruptures into the broad ligament, there can be formation of secondary broad ligament pregnancy. Sometimes there can be formation of pelvic hematoma or hematocele, but sometimes what happens, this ectopic pregnancy, there will be slow release of this products from the ruptured end. It is not very fast, and it will get the formation of a mass, and which leads to chronic ectopic pregnancy. And this here, the patient will usually feel there is a recurrent pain into the abdomen. Patient will usually present with chronic pelvic pain. So what are the clinical features? So usually, many a times, the classical symptoms are not present. So it is most important to have a high index of suspicion. Always it is that, always keep in your mind, think of ectopic. If you see there is that there can be a suspicious of ectopic, think of ectopic is the thing which you have to keep in your mind. So what are the classical triad of ectopic? Usually the clinical features will depend upon whether it is an acute ectopic, whether it is an unruptured tubal ectopic, or whether it is a chronic or old ectopic pregnancy. So the classic triad of ectopic pregnancy is amenorrhea, which is there in around 75% cases. The most important symptom will be abdominal pain, and irregular vaginal bleeding or spotting will be seen. But abdominal pain is almost there in around 90% even without the rupture of ectopic pregnancy. So acute ectopic, we'll see that what are the clinical symptoms and signs of acute ectopic pregnancy. So usually this occurs in a young uh, woman around 20 to 30 years of age. The onset is acute. The patient will have persistent, usually they will come with acute abdominal pain. So unilateral uneasiness, sometimes the patient can say that she's continuously having dragging abdominal pain only on one side before the appearance of the acute symptom. So abdominal pain, as we have said, that proceed by amenorrhea and vaginal bleeding. The other thing is very important, sometimes the patient will have in between the fainting attacks. So sudden blackouts, they will tell that there is spells of sudden blackouts are seen. This is because of the reflex vasomotor disturbances when there is a blood into the peritoneal cavity. Vomitings may or may not be present. So this is the thing which can happen when there is a rupture, and this is an acute thing when the patient will come either if it is in the shock condition to the emergency department, or she can come to the OPD also with pain in abdomen. But when there is a massive hemorrhage, usually the patient will be in the case of shock and she will be seen in the emergency department. So what are the signs? When the patient is, we'll see, we examine the patient, usually the patient is in a distress. What else? Because she is having this pain, she will be in a distress, she's quite but conscious, perspires if there is a bleeding inside, there is, she perspires. Sometimes she can be in a features of shock. So there is a tachycardia, there is so rapid pulse is there is hypotension, she is extremely pale, dehydrated, conscious, cold, clammy skins will be there. There is when we examine her abdomen, so patient will not allow us to touch her abdomen. So that's what it is tense, tender, and rebound rigidity also. It means not as a rigidity. Rigidity will be there. Pelvic examination, the patient will be wincing, and you should be very much gentle when you are doing a pelvic examination when the patient comes with history of pain, on mostly on one side. So what is the most important finding here is when you do per vaginal, sometime on per speculum examination, then can be little slight bleeding will be seen. On per vaginal examination, the most important is there will be cervical movements, tenderness will be there. Patient will wince with pain if you try to do per vaginal examination. There will be formation of a adnexal mass sometimes if it is a think pelvic muscle, you can feel there is a mass. If it is an unruptured ectopic also, you can feel there is a adnexal mass. But you should be very much gentle when doing vaginal examination, as there can be chances of rupture when you are doing that. So it is then when it is unruptured. We have seen the ruptured ectopic pregnancy clinical signs and symptoms. But when it is an unruptured ectopic pregnancy, so usually this patients will have a continuous dragon pain. Normally she will come to your antenatal checkup with history of amenorrhea, maybe or may not be amenorrhea, delayed periods or spotting, and uneasiness on one side of pain count. But the unruptured pregnancy or your ruptured ectopic pregnancy usually will be diagnosed when we send a patient for routine first trimester ultrasound. So it is included as a sexually active female who has come with abnormal bleeding and abdominal pain, and she is having the history of all the risk factors. So on bimanual examination, usually the uterus will be soft and a small tender mass can be felt through one fornix, which is separate from the uterus. Here we can get a suspicion of ectopic. So what will happen when there is a chronic or old ectopic pregnancy? So the chronic ectopic pregnancy, sometimes there can be history of amenorrhea, sometimes cannot be. There will be, patient will have a chronic recurrent lower abdominal pain. So either it's initially she will give a history, there is an acute pain and which has become dull, colicky, sudden it has reduced, again it is coming intermittently and going. Then there is a vaginal bleeding. So it is very scanty, it is not bleeding, it's actually spotting on and off, very serosanguinous color discharge. But the patient, when we examine her, the patient doesn't look good. She doesn't look healthy. She looks ill. There is a pallor. But usually in chronic ectopic pregnancy, the shock is not there. There can be some temperature elevation, some tachycardia will be there, not much hypotension will be there. But on abdominal examination, there can be not much tense and tender, but tenderness will be vague, tenderness will be there when you do on a deep palpation. Sometimes if it is a big pure mass, there can be formation of, we can feel the mass in the lower abdomen. Usually these patients of chronic ectopic pregnancy will present not with the symptoms of amenorrhea, bleeding, but bladder irritation, rectal tenesmus. They will usually come with pain during defecation. That is the most important complaint this patient will give it to you. So then how we will diagnose? So the diagnosis is usually, as I said, you always think ectopic. If you think ectopic on the back of your side of this one, so ectopic, ectopic, ectopic should be there. So how will you diagnose acute ectopic? Because it is a classic history of acute abdominal catastrophe with fainting attacks, collapse. The patient is in shock with intra-abdominal hemorrhage in a woman of childbearing age. The first thing which will come to your mind should be ectopic. And there's no time should be wasted for doing investigation for this case. That's the routine, some investigation, you take a blood, send for the investigation. But what are the differential diagnoses for this acute ectopic? It can be acute appendicitis, where the patient will usually have fever, vomiting, right pain, right lower abdominal pain. Then ruptured corpus luteum, it will be sometimes very difficult to differentiate between acute ectopic and ruptured corpus luteum. Usually these both present with the same catastrophe sometimes, but history of amenorrhea may not be there. Then there is a twisted ovarian tumor where the bleeding will not be there. Then perforated peptic ulcer, which is nowadays very rare. So subacute or chronic ectopic is usually very difficult to diagnose only by clinical examination. But usually we should keep it that on the back of mind that there can be. So what are the investigations usually we do? The routine investigation, and this ectopic usually are diagnosed when it is to be investigated for chronic abdominal pain, chronic pelvic pain, and on by TVS ultrasound mostly. Sometimes on by laparoscopy when there is a doubt. So nowadays no laparotomy, usually we'll go for laparoscopy. So differential diagnosis can be incomplete abortion, salpingitis, appendicitis, which is subacute. So this is the case of right ectopic pregnancy, which is not ruptured. So this is unruptured ectopic. Can you see the tube has been very much thinned out? There is a bluish discoloration. There is a swelling is there. So the transvaginal ultrasound and serum beta HCG are the two important aids in the diagnosis of unruptured ectopic pregnancy. Laparoscopy is usually rarely required for diagnosis. So in general, the presence of non-cystic extraovarian adnexal mass in the absence of an intrauterine gestation on TVS is highly suggestive of ectopic pregnancy. One more important thing here will be the pregnancy of unknown location. We'll discuss this afterwards. Management usually, the management will depends upon the clinical features, whether it is a acute ectopic pregnancy, either ruptured ectopic, unruptured ectopic, or chronic ectopic pregnancy. So what are the manage? Usually expectant management. Expectant management will be if it is a very early and when on the ultrasound, when we diagnose that there is a very small sac which is less than 1.5 centimeter and the beta HCG levels are less than 1000, the patient is hemodynamically stable, clinically stable, no symptoms are there respect of only pain in abdomen, the patient can come for follow-up at any result. So after counseling the patient, can do the expectant management, wait and watch, and we can repeat the ultrasonography. Then what is the medical management? Nowadays, each and every, because we are diagnosing the ectopic pregnancies early in, so we can go for medical management, but the medical management can be local or systemic management. So we'll see what are the criteria to go for medical management, surgical management. This is a broad outline of management. So either in systemic, we can give injectable methotrexate locally under ultrasound guidance, or laparoscopic, we can give methotrexate, potassium chloride, prostaglandins, hyperosmolar glucose. This is all mifepristone are given into the site of ectopic pregnancy. Then surgical management, this is usually, it is a ectopic and ruptured ectopic, patient is not hemodynamically stable, she has completed her childbearing, will go for salpingectomy. So there can be some surgical conservative managements also are there where we want to conserve the tube. Salpingostomy, salpingotomy, segmental resection, milking or fimbrial expansion. Usually this will be done very rarely. So how do you manage the ruptured ectopic pregnancy? The first important is ruptured ectopic pregnancy. You should be very quick in diagnosing and management because you have very less time and you have to save the mother. So the principle is resuscitation and laparotomy saying, but if the patient is little bit stable, even if it is a ruptured ectopic, but she is a hemodynamically stable, you can do nowadays laparoscopy. It depends upon, so how good is the surgeon and how good is the surgeon. So it is the capability and ability of the surgeon taking care of the case is very important. So whether it is surgeon, this one should go for laparoscopy or laparotomy, even though it is a ruptured ectopic. So what are the anti-shock treatments? Is usually the wide bore cannula number 18, green color. You should put 2 IV cannulas, start the crystolite, send the blood investigations, routine investigation, complete blood count, blood grouping, cross matching, and once only you have to take the blood when you are giving send the blood for cross matching, and it is at least minimum 2 points. Previously, nowadays we are not there, but previously when we were undergraduate or postgraduate students, what we used to do is we used to collect the blood from the centrouterine abdominal cavity. We had to filter it through the gauges, 4 to 5 layer of gauze, and we used to transfuse that same blood only. But nowadays, with the access of this blood banks, which give us very rapidly the blood, all the blood products, it is not required. Nowadays, nobody is doing that. So do the catheterization, take the high risk consent, explain the relatives what is the problem, and uh, take the patient immediately either for laparoscopy, laparotomy, depending upon the surgeon's plan. So usually in laparotomy, this one is you have to quick in and quick out. So rapid exploration of the abdominal cavity, and usually because there is a rupture, the tube has already damaged. So salpingectomy is the definitive surgery. The most important thing here, we have to think that we are only going to remove the tube. We are not going to remove the ovaries. Ovaries has to be conserved, and we should take care that there will be minimal interruption of the blood supply of the ovary. So ovaries, there is no salpingo-oophorectomy, there is only salpingectomy. So when the transfusion, once we clamp the bleeding end, the patient, the blood pressure of the patient starts coming in. So how much quick you are in clamping the bleeding point is very important. Then you can give the blood and manage the patient. As the patient, once it is ligated, the bleeding point, the patient is out of danger. So, so laparoscopy, nowadays laparoscopy, usually why we prefer laparoscopy? The first thing is there is a patient will have minimal pain, recovery is rapid, this is a minimal invasive surgery, no need for the patient to stay in the hospital. And so the very nice machines and expertise of the surgeon in available can go for, unless it is a massive intra-abdominal hemorrhage and the patient is in very much hemodynamically unstable. Where the anesthesia is also a problem, you can go for laparotomy or laparoscopy. Both can be done in ruptured ectopic. So how you will manage the unruptured ectopic pregnancy? Here the management part is very important. So there are options, either you can go for surgery or you can go for surgically administered medical treatment or expectant management. As I already told you, so these are usually diagnosed when we send a patient for when nowadays patients are coming very early, immediately after they miss their period, they are coming for the consultation, and we do the first one. So the most of the use of transvaginal ultrasound in first trimester of pregnancy, as we are getting the more and more cases of unruptured ectopic pregnancy, we have been able to diagnose this very early. So when this is very important, because if we diagnose very early, we can reduce the maternal morbidity and mortality. So criteria for the expectant management are the tubal pregnancies, it has to be only tubal pregnancy. Hemodynamically stable patient, no much hemoperitoneum, and adnexal mass, here they have mentioned 3.5 centimeter, but usually 1.5 to 2 centimeter without heartbeat, and beta HCG levels are less than 1000. And when we repeat the beta HCG, if it is falling levels of beta HCG after third day, then you can go for expectant management. Usually the success rate is 60%. How we'll do the expectant management? But here the most important is we have to hospitalize the patient. Most important, we have to strict monitoring of the clinical symptoms. Hemoglobin should be seen. Day 3, we should send for beta HCG, and it should be at least there should be fall in beta HCG levels more than 15%, and the beta HCG level should go less than 5. So TVS should be done twice a week. So spontaneous resolution occurs in 72%, but the most for of this ectopic expected management, the what is there, you should always keep in mind that this patient can anytime have a rupture signs and symptoms. So you should be very much prepared to go for laparoscopy or person. So usually these people will sometimes in 28% will need laparoscopic treatment. So usually, but when we do expected management, it take a very long time. So the patient always 2 months, 3 months, the patient will be coming with some, when there is a, when we do natural resolution of the trophoblast will be there. So sometimes there will be some spikes of abdominal pain. So it will be very difficult for us whether the pain is because of the rupture, small rupture, or because the pain is from the separation of the trophoblast. So there will be always a query in the mind. The percentage of fall of HCG by day 7 is a better indicator than day 3. So what is the medical management? So you as the surgery is the mainstay of the treatment worldwide, but nowadays in a small this one, people are more and more favor here, because the ectopic pregnancy happen in the patient. They are when they are taking the treatment for infertility. They want to conserve their tubes. They want next further pregnancies. So they are not finished with their childbearing. So somehow they want a conservative treatment. But what are the criteria? There are very fixed criteria when we should go for the medical management. The first and most important thing is the patient should be hemodynamically stable. Second thing, there is a SAC tubal pregnancy. Medical management, tubal pregnancy, the unruptured SAC measurement should be less than 3.5 centimeter. There should not be presence of fetal bone and cardiac activity. Beta HCG levels, here they have mentioned 10,000, but we take it as a serum beta HCG levels. The good results will be there if the beta HCG levels are less than 5,000. There is a persistent ectopic after conservative surgery. We have done salpingostomy or salpingostomy, and there is a persistent ectopic. There also we can go for medical management. So what are the, before going for the medical management, what is the checklist we should do is do a complete blood count, LFT, renal function test, liver function test, serum beta HCG levels, very important. Transvaginal ultrasound should be recent within 48 hours. Informed written consent is very important when you are going for the medical management. You have to explain the patient what are the things. Patient compliance is very important for the medical management because she has to come repeatedly for the, if she is not getting admitted to the hospital, she has to come repeatedly to the hospital. If the patient is RH negative, she should receive an injection anti-D 150 microgram. There is a follow-up of beta HCG day 1, day 4 and day 7. The patient should for follow. So what is the medical management we use? So it is a methotrexate, and you all know the methotrexate is a drug which is used as an anti-malignant drug. It's a folic acid antagonist. So it has anti-neoplastic activity. It is very active against the proliferating trophoblast, and it prevents conversion of folic acid to folinic acid. It directly impairs the trophoblastic production of HCG in a second use, decrease corpus luteal progesterone production. So it can be used, methotrexate can be used, mainly we use intramuscularly, not intravenously, or it can be directly given into the ectopic site under ultrasound guidance or under laparoscopic. Usually we'll use it as a intramuscular, either single dose or multi-dose. So it is a, as I said, it is a folic acid antagonist, inactivates the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase. It interferes with DNA synthesis by inhibiting the synthesis of pyrimidines, leading to trophoblastic cell death. So single dose is usually 50 milligram per meter square body area we give on the day 1, and we on day 3 we check beta HCG levels. There should be at least more than 50% reduction beta HCG levels. Then again we will do on day 7. And when there is a falling level of beta HCG, we do it is every weekly. So this is the diagrammatic representation of the chart of dosage of methotrexate. Sometimes some people feel that when dose to give a single dose is not much sufficient and give the multi-dose. So multi-dose, it is usually 1 milligram per kg given on day 1, day 3, day 5 and day 7. But when you are giving multi-dose regime of methotrexate, you have to take into consideration, because this is a folic acid antagonist, it affects the normal cells also. So we have to supplement this with leucovorin folinic acid 0.1 milligram per kg intramuscularly on day 2, day 4, day 6 and day 8. And this alternate injection will decrease in the levels of beta HCG. So what are the advantages? Advantages is there is a minimal hospitalization. Usually this can be OPD procedure. Quick recovery is there, and it is the most important is 90% success rate when we select the case properly. But what are the disadvantages? Disadvantage as a methotrexate is anti-neoplastic activity. So there are side effects. Photosensitivity is very much. So whenever you are giving methotrexate to a lady, you have to advise her avoid exposure to sun because there can be photosensitive. There can be minor side effects like nausea, vomiting, GI side effects would be there. So monitoring is very important. Day 1, you have to do total blood count, LFT, RFT. Again, you have to repeat it after 1 week. Beta HCG will be repeated till it comes negative. So, and they should avoid taking folic acid and alcohol also. So these are the two things you should give advice to the lady. Then the next is surgical. So what is the aim is trophoblastic destruction without systemic side effect. So it is a surgically administered medical treatment, and the injection of this trophoblastic toxic substances into the ectopic sac directly by laparoscopically or ultrasonographically, either transvaginal or abdominal, but we are not doing. These are the things which can be given: hyperosmolar glucose, actinomycin D, PGF2, methotrexate, potassium chloride, mifepristone, and so on. So what are the advantage of local methotrexate? So more local methotrexate advantage is there is an increased tissue concentration at the local site. There are less systemic, because we are giving only directly into the sac. There are less systemic side effects. Decreased hospitalization because we are sure that we are giving the drug there. Then in decreased hospitalization, greater preservation of fertility. So follow-up, usually we should do that serum beta HCG level should be less than 5 international unit per. The transvaginal ultrasound should be followed every 4 weeks till it is null. So what are the instructions you will give it to the patient? That usually the patient should be very much compliant. She should be literate to understand, not that what you are trying to explain, or she should understand. The relatives should understand. They should be stay nearby. That rapid transportation should be available. They should refrain from alcohol, sunlight, multivitamins, folic acid, and the most important is there should not be sexual intercourse until the serum beta HCG levels are negative. Report immediately when the patient will get any signs like vaginal bleeding, abdominal pain, dizziness, syncope. Usually the mild pain will be there, but when there is a sudden excruciating pain, the patient has to come to the hospital. Failure of medical therapy required treatment. The chances of here, what is the disadvantage is there can be chances of rupture of the tubal topic at 5 to 10% of cases where it is the emergency laparotomy is required. So what is the other modality? Is surgery. So if surgery is usually either can be conservative surgery or, and usually we do surgery in cases where there is a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. And the second thing, when there is a medical management is failed. It is required in 10% of the cases. So it is can be done laparoscopically or with a microsurgical laparotomy. Small incision we can take, not very much big. Here, the indication is the patient requires future fertility and the contralateral conservative surgeries, salpingectomy, not salpingectomy, salpingostomy and salpingotomy are required when there is a patient requires, she want to have her conserve her tube. When the future fertility is desired, the most important here, these patients are usually the infertile patient where already the one tube is damaged or surgically removed and she want to conserve this second tube. So the choice of the technique depends upon where is the location of the sac, what is the size of the sac, what is the condition of the other tube, and this is very, very important when you are managing the case. The condition of the opposite tube is very much important, and the accessibility. So what are the various conservative surgeries? They are linear salpingostomy. It is usually advised when the sac size is less than 1.5 to 2 centimeter. Unruptured ectopic in ampullary region, where a linear incision is given on the anti-mesenteric border over the site and it has been evacuated. The products of conception that be curated or evacuated either by fingers, scalpel handle or gentle suction irrigation. And in salpingostomy, we will keep it open. We will not again suture it. It will heal by secondary intention. The bleeding points are cauterized with use of minimal cautery and the site is left open. Then linear salpingotomy. The incision is closed. In salpingotomy, we will close the incision with 2 layers of vicryl. Segmental resection and anastomosis, usually unruptured ischemic, because their anastomosis is a razor, but this is not done very routinely. So this is how it is. We will open it, and usually before opening we'll inject the vasopressin inside so that there will not be much bleeding. Antimesenteric border, small incision is taken bilaterally and removed. So salpingostomy, salpingotomy, segmental resection, and anastomosis. Milking or fimbrial expression, when there is a distal fimbrial or infundibular pregnancy, when the other tube is healthy, it is can be done, but there is chances of persistent ectopic. With this conservative treatment, the one most important is there can be small trophoblastic tissue can be retained, and this can lead to persistent ectopic or chronic ectopic. So what advantages of laparoscopy is it helps in diagnosis, evaluation, treatment, see and treat. Here this is modality, see and treat in laparoscopy. Diagnose other causes of infertility, decrease hospitalization, operative time, recovery period, and analgesics. So all other advantages with laparoscopy are there here. Then follow up after conservative surgery. We have to follow the patient with serum beta HCG levels till it is negative. And if here there is a role of methotrexate, when there is the beta HCG levels are not falling up at least 15% and they are constant or there is a plateau, here we can give a single dose of methotrexate intramuscularly. So the definitive treatment, salpingectomy, when we can do partial, usually it is a total salpingectomy only. The patient is finished her childbearing. So the choice of surgical treatment does not influence the post-treatment fertility, but prior history of infertility is associated with marked reduction in infertility after the treatment. So laparotomy versus laparoscopy, I have already told you, laparoscopy is reserved for patients who are hemodynamically stable. There is a rupture, but they are stable. Ruptured ectopics does not necessarily require laparotomy. But if large clots are present, patient hemodynamically unstable, massive intraperitoneal hemorrhage is there, then you should go for always laparotomy and don't go for laparoscopy. So reproductive outcome, it is similar in patient treated with either laparoscopy or laparotomy. That doesn't have any difference. Identical rates, 40% intrauterine pregnancies can happen. The most important is recurrence. One ectopic recurrence is 12%. If it is either it is a radical or conservative. If there are two ectopics, the recurrence is around 28 to 30%. So persistent ectopic, usually because of the conservative management, when we have done salpingotomy or salpingostomy, I have already told you there is a risk factor is early ectopic, size less than the, and there is less than 50% decrease in the beta HCG levels, then we should suspect the persistent ectopic. Either you go for total partial salpingectomy or methotrexate doses. So we have come to the end of tubal ectopics. The next we will discuss other ectopic sites in the next lecture. Before that, I just want to one thing, pregnancy of unknown location. Here, it is called as a PUL. PUL is said to occur when the pregnancy test is positive and neither there is an intrauterine pregnancy or extrauterine pregnancy is visualized on TVS. The incidence is usually normally depends upon the expertise of the person who is doing ultrasound, sonologist, and the equipment. In such cases, what we have to do is follow with serial beta HCG levels and progesterone levels. So what can happen with PUL? Either there can be early intrauterine pregnancy, either ectopic or a failing pregnancy. So wait and watch is very important. So what are the sequelae? Sequelae main important is either this ectopic can lead to infertilities or report ectopic. So with medical and surgical management, the fertility rates are around 65%. The risk of future ectopic around see. But one important thing when we treat the patient, at least they should avoid the next pregnancy till 3 months. So you can go to the site as I mentioned on www.medinat.com where you can see the video of ruptured ectopic. Thank you. Ma'am,